let's go ahead and get started. So my talk today is about business agility, pivot or perish. How do the slides look? Can we see the slides okay? Awesome. So what I'm talking about today is we'll start with the need for business agility, then I'll define business agility, and then I'll go through some of the key enablers for business agility. So Marcus already introduced me. Thank you very much. Here's all my contact info. Please feel free to join me on LinkedIn. Feel free to follow me on Twitter. The slides I have here are available on my SlideShare account. So you can go to SlideShare and search for my name. You'll see them. I think the PMISSC is also going to make the slides available, I believe, as well. So you can access the slides after class, after the session that way as well. All right, so let's start with the need for business agility. So here are two companies, Kodak and Fujifilm. So let's talk about Kodak first. So Kodak in its prime, over 100,000 employees, over $1 billion in cash reserves, over $1 billion worth of patents and intellectual property. And ironically enough, they invented the digital camera, which eventually really comes back and really hits them because the Kodak of today isn't the Kodak of years past. They're still around kind of, but they now have less than 5,000 employees, sold almost all their patents and intellectual property, and has filed for bankruptcy a couple times now. And they're hanging on, but it's certainly not what it was. That's Kodak. Let's talk about Fujifilms. So Fujifilm found himself in a similar situation, but Fujifilm was able to pivot. What Fujifilm did is they started another line of business. They have multiple lines of business as a big conglomerate, but they started another line of business that was wildly popular. What they realized is all the raw materials they use for processing film are the same raw materials we use in another industry, and they were able to start another line of business. Anyone have a guess what their other line of business is that essentially uses the same raw ingredients? Anyone know? Oh, and by the way, if you don't know, it's almost impossible to guess. So what Fujifilm was able to pivot to, cosmetics. So this brand, Asolift, it's not very well known in the US. They don't have much of a US presence, but it is wildly popular in Asia. What Fujifilm realized was basically all the raw materials we use to make digital film, to make not digital film, print film, essentially is the same raw materials we use in cosmetics. And so Fuji was able to pivot into the cosmetic area. Asolift, wildly popular in Asia, and actually has plans to expand into the US. One of the companies I've worked with for years is Marriott. It's actually a really nice company, great hotels. I like their hotels a lot. So Marriott for years thought their biggest competitors were the Hyatts, the Hiltons, the Sheratons and such. As of today, Airbnb has more rental room listings than the next 5 hotel chains combined, and it's not even close, right? You can see the numbers up here. By the time companies like Marriott realized that Airbnb was out there, it was harder for them to pivot because they're such big entities. March of 2020, this is my home office right here. And so March of 2020, most of us got hit with our first pandemic ever. And so what we saw was, in essence, in the course of a week or two, we saw almost everyone transfer their works to working from home, right? And so what happened there was we saw a lot of companies, right, have to go through this shift. And what we saw was some companies made the transition very seamlessly, and some companies really struggled with that transition, right? And that really goes to show that need for business agility, because things change on a dime. I was at a business agility conference a couple of years ago, and the keynote speaker, Mike Beadle, one of the Agile Manifesto signatories, who tragically died last year, actually 2 years ago, he had a quote. And so his quote was, when someone says they have 30 years of business experience, the danger is they are still doing business like they did 30 years ago, right? It's not that experience isn't great, but we cannot do business like we did 30 years ago. The world is just different, right? So all this really drives home some of our need for business agility. So let's talk about that. Let's first talk about what business agility even is. This is from the Agile Business Consortium. Business agility is ability for an organization to adapt quickly to market changes, both internally and externally, respond quickly and flexibly to customer demands, adapt and lead change in effective ways without compromising quality, continuously be at a competitive advantage. That's how the consortium, the Agile Business Consortium, defines agility. Right? So what I'll talk about in the bulk of this session are 6 key enablers that will help us, your organizations, with that agility. What I have up here are the 6 enablers, and I'm going to go through these at a high level. But before I move on, any questions so far? I think we're good so far. Let's go to Agile. So this is traditional IT project management. I am a PMP as well, as many of you are, since this is a PMI event. I'm a PMI ACP as well. And so when you study for the PMP exam, remember that, studying for the exam? That exam isn't trivial, right? This is essentially what we studied for the exam. What Agile does, it takes a slightly different approach to this. All right. Here's what I want you to do. In your participant window, for those that can find the participant window, I want you to give me a yes. Oh, wait, do we have that ability? Oh, that's okay. So in the chat window, I want you to type in yes if you've seen this before, type in no if you've never seen this before. Okay, great. So we have a mix. So take a moment to read this to yourselves. Right? And as you read this yourselves, you might be having some thoughts or questions. Some thoughts and questions and concerns might be, wait a minute, hey, you know what? We need to have a plan. You know, we need to have process and tools. We need to have documentation. We need our contracts to be in place. So to give you a bit of background here, I think we have a hot mic. Let me see if I can mute this person. Can someone mute the hot mic, please? Margaret's iPhone. So for the Agile Manifesto, the history, can someone mute Margaret's iPhone, please? So for the Agile Manifesto, the history behind this was such. Oh, let me make the request one more time, please. Can someone please? Thank you very much. So for the Agile Manifesto, the history behind this was this. What had happened was in the 80s to 90s, we started getting really bad at developing software. And so what we started seeing was an uprising and a lot of lightweight methods to combat that. Methods like Scrum, Kanban, DSDM, Crystal, RUP, Rational Unified Process, XP, Extreme Programming, Spiral, Prototyping, Rapid. We started seeing uprising a lot of lightweight methods to try to align our development better. So finally what happened was in 2001, a group of IT thought leaders got together and came up with this at a high level. So in 2001, 17 of the then smartest people in the industry came up with this at a high level. Here's what they're saying. We're not saying that we're ignoring the things on the right. What we're saying is that the things on the right are things we do, but it's not where the value is. And what we had seen back in 2001 is a lot of companies had basically overcompensated on the right. That's what they had seen. Now, based on that, they identified, okay, if we had overcompensated on the right, what do we need to be doing better, right? And what they identified was they looked at some of the best companies in the world, some of the best products in the world, some of the best teams in the world, and identified what made those folks better than everyone else. And what they saw was a strong culture of the left, right? And so a couple quick notes here is individuals' interactions over process and tools. Every place you go is going to have some kind of process and tool in place. But what the people came up identified here is where success really happens. It's your people and how they work together. It's your culture. Every place you go has process and tools, right? But what they observed is that any organization that uses the process and tools as a singular or primary form of communication, those were nowhere near the best organizations. What they identified in the best organizations is a strong culture that focused on people working effectively together. That was point number one. Every place has process and tools, but what really separates organizations is the people there and how they work together. That's the first point. Second point, working software over comprehensive documentation. One note is that Agile does come from the IT software background. In modern years, we've extended it to the to other domains, but just note that you see the word software here because it does have its roots in IT. But the second point here, the note here is, look, some of you are in the government, some of you in highly regulated industries. We're not getting rid of our documentation, but the focus is the delivery of product, and the documentation should be there to support that. In fact, what I coach and teach is the concept of minimal viable bureaucracy, because by definition, anything less is irresponsible, but by definition, anything more is excessive. The example I give here is if I have documentation needs for the auditors, I would meet with the auditors, identify what the needs are, then I would give them just a little bit less than I know they need. Then I'll sit down with them and say, hey, here's what I have so far. I know it's not everything, but can we work together to identify what's missing? Because by doing so, they don't end up with a bunch of paperwork that they don't want to read through, and I don't end up wasting a bunch of time creating a bunch of stuff no one cares about. Minimal viable bureaucracy as we deliver the working product. Customer collaboration, contract negotiation. Contracts are certainly critical. However, anyone ever been in a situation where you were told you're not allowed to talk to these people? They're off limits to you. Have to talk to this other person instead. That person doesn't even know anything. Anyone ever been in that situation before? Hopefully your answer is no. No, I want to see no as your answer. But what this says right here is, look, as a responsible vendor, I'm not just trying to fulfill a contract, hopefully giving you value. I want to solve real problems in an impactful way. And to do that, we have to collaborate with the right people to make sure that we solve real problems. That's point number 3. Point number 4 is respond to change over following a plan. There's a misconception in Agile that we don't have a plan, we just go at it. We absolutely do have a plan. At a high level, this is a plan right here. I'll come back to this later. But what we're saying here is our plan isn't the value itself, it's how we get to the value. And if what we learn day to day requires us to change the plan to achieve the value, then our plan has to be changeable to still achieve that value. Those are the points here. Any questions about that? We're not saying ignore the right, but it's the focus on left over the right. That's the heart of Agile. If I had more time, I would go through this in more detail, but these are the 12 principles behind Agile. Basically, there's some slanted toward the customers, about early and continuous delivery of valuable product, business and IT working together, building projects around motivated team members, giving them the environment to succeed, continuous attention to excellence and quality, and regularly reflecting and getting better are some of the key principles behind the manifesto.
Hey, Richard, I think since you did the poll, I think it was great that you shared this Agile Manifesto, but I think one of the concepts that really resonated with the group in the chat, if you're probably monitoring as well, is that MVB.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. That was great.
Yeah, no, so that concept I like a lot because it's hard to argue, right? Because by definition, anything less is irresponsible, but by definition, anything more is excessive. In fact, I know that I think the next speaker, Chris, will talk about the PMO. One of the things that I've noticed with effective PMOs versus less so, effective PMOs reduce the burden of reporting from the team. That's what I've seen in really great organizations is effective PMOs reduce the burden of reporting from the teams. What I've seen in less effective PMOs is they increase the burden of reporting from the teams. And so if you want to gauge how effective your PMO is are they keeping your organization governed and aligned while reducing that heft? Or are they increasing the heft, increasing our friction, increasing our slowness, reducing our agility? That's just a side note. But one quick note about Agile is that it is an umbrella concept. So Agile is a mindset, it's a way of thinking. You cannot implement Agile. If your organization tomorrow were to say, hey, we're all going to be 100% Agile now, all right, what are we doing? There's nothing to do. Agile is a way of thinking driven by these 12 principles and these 4 value points. The way you use Agile is when you put together your day-to-day processes, your day-to-day policies, your day-to-day rules. If it aligns with these 4 value points and these 12 principles, we're probably taking an Agile approach. If it conflicts with them, the approach may not be aligned with our agility. So underneath the Agile umbrella are methods like Scrum. 85% of the world that does Agile does Scrum or a variation of an iterative incremental framework. Kanban is the other 15%. Kanban is great if the nature of work is more operational, more transactional. Things flow in, things flow out. The Kanban-based flow system, I think, is great. XP is another Agile method. You don't see XP out in the field much today. It stands for Extreme Programming, but a lot of our technical practices come from the XP world. Practices like pair programming, continuous integration, DevOps, research spikes. A lot of those had their roots in the XP world. So Agile is a mindset. Some of those items there, Scrum, Kanban, XP are the methods. Any questions about Agile? Let's talk about the Scrum Framework. So in the participant window, give me a yes if you've used Waterfall before. Give me a no if Waterfall is not familiar to you. I imagine with the group here, a lot of project managers and a lot of PMPs, we would have had exposure to Waterfall. Okay, great. So 1970, Dr. Royce wrote about Waterfall. Dr. Royce didn't invent Waterfall, but he's the first documented case we have of someone really getting deep in Waterfall. It's actually a very good white paper you can find on the internet. So that's Waterfall. Scrum takes a different approach to this concept. So this is Scrum at a high level. One of the core differences between Waterfall and Scrum, between traditional project management and Scrum, is traditional project management has a strong focus on WBS. Can someone type in what WBS means? All of you should know this. We're at a PMI event, right? This should be rote memory. What does WBS stand for? Exactly. Tiara gets the prize for being the first to type it in. Deanna comes in second. It is indeed work breakdown structure. So in a very traditional waterfall approach, what you would have up here is initially you would gather the requirements, do the design, build out our projects, test it, release it. That's a very common waterfall pattern. Scrum takes a vastly different approach. It's not WBS, it's an FBS. F as in Frank. Take a guess as to what the F stands for. What do you think the F stands for? And I'll give you a hint. The F does not stand for Frank. What do you think the F stands for in FBS? All right. Beth May gets the win. Deanna comes in second once again. You got to be split second faster next time, Deanna. So it is feature or function breakdown structure. Right. So here's the example I like to use. Who here has used Microsoft Word before? Oh, by the way, if you didn't raise your hand just now, I question how you would have got this far in life as a functioning adult, because at some point you would have had a resume, written a paper. So imagine we're building Microsoft Word from scratch using Scrum. Here's the way it would work. What you would build first are all the highest value features. So in this example, open type, save, edit, print. Because once you have that, I can send it out, people can play with it. If that doesn't work, nothing else matters. But if that's stable and responsive and usable, that's my base product. That's essentially Notepad. Right? I can put that out and move on to next steps. Then using a Scrum-based feature-based model, next would be the next highest, most important thing, stuff like maybe spell check, font formatting, then inserting tables, inserting images. Right? After that would be things that are less important, subscript and superscript, which I use, but not as much as spell check. Mill merge, I've never used that before, put that later. Track changes, I do use track changes, so I put that in front of mail merge. And then at the end would be things that would be much lesser priority, like wingdings, not a real language, double strike through. Why do I need two strike through when I already have one? Clippy, you folks remember Clippy? Clippy was a paperclip assistant that would jump out and help you and would wink at you and give you advice. No one liked Clippy. Put Clippy at the end. So that's the way Scrum works. And one of the biggest advantages that kind of model gives you is if we lose, let's say we thought we had enough time and money to get us to 100%, but let's say we ran out of time and money at 60%. If you're doing Scrum, here's what you have. Open type, save, edit, print, working well. Inserting tables, inserting images, spell check, working well. Font formatting, track changes, all working well. Subscript, superscript, working well. Here's what I don't have. I don't have mill merge, don't have wingdings, don't have Clippy, don't have double strike through. So what happens there is, as the product manager, if I could release what I have now, do the rest later, release what I have now and never do the rest. The other option I have is if I don't have enough features, I could extend my deadline date, right? Those are the options you get when you deliver using a Scrum-based iterative incremental framework. Yeah. So that's Scrum at a high level. Let me go to a lower level. So this is Scrum at the execution level. I'll walk us through the blanks. So number one here, oh, by the way, As you look at this diagram, all the triangles represents the roles in Scrum, all the circles represent the artifacts, all the squares represent events or activities. Number one is the role in Scrum, who's responsible for bringing the voice of the business and being the focus of that for the team. If you know the answer, feel free to type it in. Number one is the product owner. Number two is the artifact in Scrum that stores all of our requirements and all of our needs. Anyone know that? Good job, Beth May, on the first one. Yeah, great. The product backlog. Right here it says PBI. Those stand for the items in the product backlog, generically called product backlog items. While in some environments, you might hear them referred to as stories or user stories. In Scrum, they're called the product backlog items. Number three is the role in Scrum responsible for delivering the solutions. Any guesses? Number three is the dev team. By dev team, we don't just mean the coders, we mean all team members working together to develop solutions. Typically involves people with backgrounds in coding, testing, analysis, because I want testing and coding analysis, all that baked into the same team. What we're trying to move away from is that 1980s old school concept of requirements team, handing off to a design team, handing off to requirements team, handing off to a test team. Right? It's just really slow and risky when you do it that way. We want to have all those capabilities integrated on my dev team, right? So by dev team, we don't just mean the coders, we mean all team members working together to develop solutions. That's the dev team. Number four, what's the first meeting in Scrum that gets us prepared for the sprint? Any guesses? First meeting in Scrum that prepares us for the sprint? Sprint planning. Sprint planning is where the product owner, dev team, and Scrum Master get together and ensure that they bring into the sprint what they believe they can finish in that sprint and make their plans for the sprint. That's sprint planning. Now, the output of sprint planning, that's the team's plan for the sprint. Here, we have a product backlog that stores everything we want. Number five is the sprint backlog, team's plan for the sprint. Number six, what's the role in Scrum? Responsible for ensuring the team understands the framework well, helps with continuous improvement, removes impediments, right? Scrum Master. That is probably the least well-known, most understood thing in this whole picture. For anyone that hasn't taken the Certified Scrum Master class, I highly recommend it. For sure, take it through me, but there's a lot of people that offer it as well. It's this Scrum Master piece. It's not a project manager. It's not a team lead. It's not a tech lead. It's something different and new. Think of it more like a team-based coach. So then you go into your sprint anywhere from 1 to 4 weeks. I like 2 weeks a lot. So you work in 2-week cycles. Sometimes you hear referred to as sprints or iterations, right? During that time, the team meets every day to have a quick sync up. What's this daily meeting called? Daily Scrum is correct. Sometimes you hear referred to as a daily stand-up, like Howard has over here. Very nice, Howard. Daily Scrum, 15 minutes max, so the team can be synced up and aligned for the day. Number 8 is the real-time act of requirements management. Anyone know what number 8 is? It's probably one of the trickiest ones on this list. What is number 8? Oh, nice. So grooming, Scrum actually calls it refinement, but you will often hear referred to as grooming. Basically, one of the core differences between Scrum and Waterfall is in a very traditional Waterfall approach. Let's say I have a year-long project. It would spend maybe the first 2 months or so gathering full detailed requirements for everything. But from a Scrum standpoint, what we realize is, especially in the IT world, is that it's pointless to collect detailed requirements for something I might do 6 months from now, because by the time I get there, things may have changed, right? So from a Scrum standpoint, I still have my roadmap, so I know what we're building at a high level. I still need enough of my product backlog to get me ready for the first set of sprints. But what we do in refinement is, while I'm in the midst of the current sprint, I'm getting the requirements in better shape for the upcoming sprints. For you PMPs in the room, this was on the exam. On the exam, we called it rolling wave planning. Scrum calls it refinement. Coming out of the sprint, number 9 is where we invite our end users, our customers, our stakeholders to review what we built so far. What is number 9? Good. It's called a sprint review. Sometimes, like Howard said, you hear referred to as a demo. If you're very old school, Scrum originally called it a show and tell. And so you hear referred to sometimes as a demo or a review or show and tell. That's where we present what we built so far to my end users and customers and stakeholders. The concept here is that if I get feedback at the end, it's very expensive. If I get feedback sooner, it reduces the cost of the change, and it gives me more and better options to address the feedback. Sprint review. Number 10 is what's delivered at the end of every sprint. It's a potentially shippable product increment. At the end of every sprint, what I like is to have some more updates to my product. That's our increment. Number 11 is the meeting we have where we're constantly getting better. What is number 11? Retrospective is correct. All right, Howard, you get an A. Retrospective. Scrum inherently cheats. If you don't like something in Scrum, we talk about it in the retrospective, and we fix it. Think of it as a lessons learned or post-mortem, except it happens at the end of every sprint. Yeah. So this picture right here is the execution level details behind the Scrum framework. On top of that picture are the release, roadmap, and vision layers. Any questions about Scrum? Let's go to design thinking next. So if I had more time, I'd show a video here, but at the end, I'm gonna give you links to all the videos. But design thinking is an approach to our products that's different than the traditional approach. Traditional product thinking, what you think about is the product first, right? And you kind of build product out. What design thinking does is it takes a vastly different approach to this. What design thinking does is we ignore the product initially. We think about the users first and what their needs are, what their goals are, what their pain points are. Once we understand that, that drives everything else. So here's the model basically, is first we have to understand. So we have to identify who our users are. We have to empathize with them, understand their needs and their pain points. Then define those needs and pain points and better clearly. Then we ideate and think about how do we meet those needs and pain points. Then we create prototypes to test out those concepts, and then we test out those concepts. If it turns out that our users like this, then we'll implement the full solution. If not, we have to treat this different, right? We have to basically re-explore the concept. That in essence, yeah, go ahead.
There's a question. Are there any industries or technologies, et cetera, that do not lend themselves well to the Agile?
Yeah, from an Agile standpoint, I would say you should use Agile everywhere because it's a mindset. And basically, mindset is basically about respecting your people, being responsive to our customers, and constantly improving. The Agile mindset you should apply to all industries. Now, Scrum is one of the Agile methods. You don't want to use Scrum everywhere. I would use Scrum in an environment where I'm trying to build a product, right? Where I can produce a vision and a roadmap and build towards a greater goal. I think that's great for Scrum. Also, Scrum is great when there's a lot of unknowns where I need a lot of inspect and adapt. That's great for Scrum as well. But if you have something that's more operational, more transactional, I'd probably use Kanban instead. Yeah. Good question, by the way. Design thinking here. This is the Lean Canvas. One of the classes I teach is an advanced product ownership course. And so this is one of the templates we use there. One note about design, the Lean Canvas here is it works really well with design thinking because the areas I've shaded in green here are the areas that I coach people to work on first when using design thinking model. You think about the customer segments, right? Who your customers are, what are some characteristics for early adopters? You think about what problems they have, how they solve their problems today. And then once you have that in mind, then you start working on the other parts once you have the users first. This template here helps you model that. By the way, at the end of this module, I'll give you the link to this template too. This template is open source. I don't own it. I don't get any revenue from it. So it's open source, so you're free to use it, not a commercial plug. Come to my training, that's the commercial plug. Lean Startup is next. Lean Startup, what we do here is first you create the vision, right? Then you identify critical assumptions. You build just enough to test the critical assumptions. Then you release that test, you measure the behavior, and from there, you either pivot. If your assumptions have proved true, then you proceed to next steps. If the assumptions prove false, you have to pivot away. The difference between Lean Startup and design thinking is design thinking creates a heavy emphasis on thinking about your users first, but then Lean Startup can take over from there and create the vision, map your assumptions out, and test your assumptions. By assumptions, by the way, one of the ways we like to break assumptions down from a Lean Startup model is basically the concept of, is something desirable? Is something feasible? Is something viable? Desirable means, do our users want it? Feasible means, can we build it? Viable means as an organization, as a company, is this a type of thing we should be doing? Right? You can make assumptions in these areas. So when we make assumptions, we could label it as one of these. And what we're trying to do is cohese our assumptions so all the good ones end up in the middle. Go ahead and bring into our product. Oh, there's a question from Roger. If you want to learn about Agile and Scrum concepts in general, what you're going to want to do is take the Certified Scrum Master course, and not a plug. I teach as well as others, so you can take it from any of us, although I recommend me to teach it from any of us. But that's a great class because that's your Agile Scrum 101 class. It's essentially the Agile roles equivalent to the PMP. And the reason why I say it that way is if you notice job postings, what you'll see in a lot of job postings is PMP preferred or PMP required. You see the same with the Agile world. When you look for Agile job postings, what you'll most often see is CSM preferred or CSM required. So to answer your question, Roger, I always recommend the CSM as a great starting point to learning about Agile. Yeah. Oh, by the way, the concept here, lean startup, notice it says lean startup. So you think, well, that doesn't apply to me. I work for a big enterprise company. Lean startup, it has, the title is lean startup because the concepts do come from the startup world. But at this point, you're seeing it in massive organizations like Procter & Gamble, organizations like General Electric, City Ventures, Toyota, Intuit, NSA are all using lean startup concepts. And this is just what I got from the 2018 article in Fortune magazine. What happens right now is that these concepts are seen used in large enterprises and large organizations. That's lean startup. Let's see here. Automation. So a couple of concepts around automation. This gets this module, and the next one gets a little more technical. So for those not in the IT space, there are some translations to your space, but this is really more IT focused. But for automation, one of the first things I want to talk about is the concept of continuous integration. Continuous integration is the creating a automated environment that's constantly checking your code. So here's how continuous integration works. So let's say I'm a developer. I made some changes to the code. Once I make changes to the code, it gets put into source control. Once we put it into the version control, it then gets sent to the build server. This is all automated. Once it goes to the build server, it runs our build. It compiles it, it does unit tests, integration tests, it packages up, deploys the package into other environments, does acceptance layer testing in the acceptance environment, does some static code analysis. Everything's green, got a green light, good job. Developer 2 makes a change, goes to version control, goes to the build server, compiles, fine. Unit test, fine. The integration test fails. Once the integration test fails, we don't even proceed because this thing is now broken, kind of like the old Toyota way. Stop the line as soon as it breaks. We get a report. The whole team gets emailed saying, Rich broke the build again. So everyone looks at me and says, Rich, you broke the build again. Go fix it right away. Items like continuous integration allows us to find our defects real time via automation. Testing. Turns out in today's world, we're constantly updating and refactoring software. One of the most expensive parts of updating and refactoring software is testing. The way you reduce that expense is via automation. So here is a diagram from Brian Merrick, who's written on the topic of Agile testing. In this table here, he has a y-axis, the up and down axes. At the top here, these tests are more business facing. These tests are more technology facing. On the x-axis here on the right side, these tests critique more the product. These tests back here support the programming. If you look at this as 4 quadrants, here's the way it should work in a very good mature shop. Functional and acceptance tests should be automated. Unit, component, and system tests should be automated. Performance and security tests have to be automated. What that means is manual testing doesn't go away, but it's reserved for this area where we do showcase tests, exploratory tests, usability tests. That's what we do the manual tests. All of the quality checks here, the functional acceptance, unit, component, system, performance, security layers, those we should automate. That's what we want in an effective organization. Right? That's a bit on automation. Right? Oh, and I see here Beth May, but DevOps. Let's talk a bit about DevOps. So the reason you brought up DevOps earlier, Beth May, I bet, is because continuous integration flows really well into our DevOps models. So here's DevOps. Here's a concept. is that DevOps, what it stands for is development and operations combined into the same unit, right? Moving once again away from these big handoffs, having the same team own the end-to-end pipeline of the product. So that same team thinks of the ideas, develops the plan, codes the plan, builds the plan, tests the plan, releases the plan. That same team also deploys the product, it operates the product, it monitors the product, and that feeds into the next version, which feeds into the next version, which feeds the next version, all the same team, development operations working as one congruent cycle. Right? So when we think about DevOps, one of the things we really think about most is we use this to mature our development to production pipeline. Companies like Netflix, Amazon, Salesforce, Google, one of the clients I work with, USCIS, releases production multiple times per day. In fact, I Googled this. I was curious one day. I said, how often does Amazon deploy to production? The results was every 11.7 seconds, right? What companies like Amazon and Netflix have are very robust DevOps pipelines. In fact, Netflix has something called the Chaos Monkey. Is anyone here familiar with the Netflix Chaos Monkey? It's awesome, by the way. So what Netflix did decades ago, so this is over 10 years ago, Netflix had a lot of self-healing code. They had code that basically could identify when it was broken and heal itself, right? But then if you have code like that, how can you test it actually works? So it turns out the only way to test it actually works is you have to have another robot in the code that goes through the code base and randomly breaks stuff. So Netflix purposely created a Chaos Monkey. The Chaos Monkey is basically a robot in the code, not a physical robot, but a digital robot in the code that goes around randomly breaking parts of code. That's the Chaos Monkey. The reason they have a Chaos Monkey is so that the auto code healing, they can identify that it is properly working, and it's the only way to test the auto code healing is to have something that automatically breaks code. That's very advanced, and that was over 10 years ago Netflix did that. They have very mature DevOps capabilities and pipelines. Any questions so far before I get into the conclusion? All right, a couple closing notes then. That same conference, Mike Beadle said this. He said, as I look around this room, I see dinosaurs. He said, some of you work for companies that are walking to your extinction. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but you're right now. I could see it right now. I could see it in your websites. I can see it in your promo codes. I can see it. You're walking to your extinction. When he said that, that really struck a chord with me because I live here in Virginia, right? And so, my home capital of Richmond, one of the biggest employers down there was Circuit City, right? There's no Circuit City anymore. All those jobs went away. Right? I have kids. My kids are 11 and 14. We grew up with Toys R Us, right? I'm a Toys R Us kid, right? And so I was very sad when Toys R Us shuttered their doors, right? And so this is a great statement. What I want to do is I want to arm organizations. What we want to do is, as an industry, we should be arming organizations with this business agility. Some of the companies I've worked with that have done a really good job with this are companies like the Motley Fool. You folks familiar with the Motley Fool? Fool.com is the website. They're based here in Alexandria, Virginia. They're probably the best agile shop I've ever worked at. They do a fantastic job.
Hey,
yeah.
As people are thinking about answering that question, Motley Fool, there's a question. Is there an advanced Chaos Monkey program now that has been more than 10 years?
Oh, I'm not as familiar with it because I had a buddy that worked there, and my buddy worked there, no longer works there, so I don't have as much insight, so I'm not sure.
Fair enough.
Yeah, although he's now working for Slack, so I bet he's doing really well now. Slack has just taken off in recent years, so he's just put himself in great spots.
True.
So Progressive is a 40,000 person insurance company. They're doing a great job. OPM, someone mentioned the breach earlier. That was a very awkward spot. I was with them at the time, and that breach made life so difficult because they locked down things so hard. It was tough. But OPM, nowhere near perfect by any means. Right? I've been working for them for over 10 years, nowhere near perfect, but where they are now versus 10 years ago, night and day. 10 years ago, there's parts of OPM that are considered toxic. They couldn't find people to work. Now those same parts, they're getting really good, fun talent there. One note is where OPM did what OPM did in 10 years, the Motley Fool did in 8 months, but it's not a fair comparison. Motley Fool is a fun startup type company, free food everywhere, free alcohol everywhere. They have 2 game rooms better than half the sports bars in town. OPM is a big government entity, but they they're all doing great jobs considering their constraints. Right? Now, for further reading, a couple books I recommend. Stephen Denning's Radical Management, great book on these concepts. One of the best books I've ever read on IT in general is The Phoenix Project. For anyone that's ever written The Goal by The Goal by Elihu Goldratt, The Phoenix Project is basically an updated version of that. Two great books. I have a good buddy of mine, Kareem Harbut, one of my best friends, actually has a book coming out in June, The 6 Enablers of Business Agility, so I highly recommend that. He does take a slightly different spin. My 6 enablers were more tactical execution level. He actually takes a top-down look at this, where his book is going to be focused more on culture, leadership, management, and creating more of a system top-down of the business agility. My talk here more about implementation concepts for business agility. Also, I'm going to put this in the chat window, but here are some links. Had I had more time, these would have been some of the videos I would have liked to have shown, but I'll put this in the chat window as well. Right. And with that said, please come to my training. My company is giving me time away to be here, so come to my training, please. And here's my information. My slides are on slideshare.net. I think I am right where I need to be from a time standpoint. Marcus, I'll pass off to you. Any questions as well as any closing thoughts?